Ethan and I spent most of our lives together, raised a son and a daughter, and walked hand in hand all the way to our golden anniversary. Before Ethan passed away, our son asked him if he had any last wishes. "After I die, bury me together with your aunt. That is my only wish in this lifetime." The room fell into complete silence, and everyone looked at me with pity. I nodded silently. "Let's do as he says." People whisper behind my back, saying that after all these years of being a devoted wife and mother, I still couldn't keep my husband's heart in the end, turning my life into a joke. But what they don't know is that if there is a next life, I will never marry Ethan. When I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn back to my wedding day. Ethan really did escape the wedding, leaving me alone to face the gossip of the crowd. I didn't feel embarrassed. Instead, I breathed a sigh of relief. My gaze slowly turned to the man in the white coat standing in the corner. "Morrison, I'm short a groom now. Would you be willing to step in?" The entire room immediately fell silent. Even the man standing in the corner froze, looking up in disbelief. "What did you just say?" Morrison's eyes were slightly red, and a sparkle of light shimmered in them as he looked at me. I smiled and walked up to him firmly in front of all the guests. "I said I want to marry you. Do you want to marry me?" Morrison was stunned, his lips trembling with excitement. Before he could speak, Ethan's parents hurried over and pulled me away. "Lana, I know that brat made you feel wrong today, but I've already sent someone to bring him back. He's just too willful, acting recklessly, that's all. Don't worry, as long as I, Eleanor, am here, his bride can only be you. Don't act on impulse and marry someone else in a fit of anger, okay?" I smiled faintly and withdrew my hand. "Eleanor, forced affection isn't sweet, and it's not like I absolutely have to marry Ethan. You should just let them be together. In my previous life, I knew very well that the one who always held the dearest place in Ethan's heart was my sister Arya. It was just because Arya had been with several boyfriends and had multiple abortions, which harmed her health. The doctor said she would never be able to have children again in this lifetime. Ethan's mother immediately objected to them being together upon hearing this news. However, the marriage alliance between the two families had long been settled. Plus, Ethan and I grew up together, and I've had a secret crush on him for years. The marriage naturally fell to me. In my past life, everyone said we walked hand in hand to our golden wedding anniversary, a rare and loving couple. We only know for ourselves whether we are happy or not. Throughout 60 years of marriage, we spent 50 of them living apart. Ethan hated me. He never even showed up the day I had a difficult childbirth. Every time our child had a birthday, he would spend the whole day at the cemetery. He often drank himself into a stupor, and in his dreams, it was always Arya's name he called out. At first, I thought love could slowly grow, and past wounds could gradually heal. But year after year, until we became bitter enemies, I finally understood, it wasn't that simple. Now that I finally have a chance to start over, I want to free him and myself as well. Seeing me holding hands with Morrison, Ethan's mother turned red with anxiety in an instant. "Lana, you were the daughter-in-law I had chosen long ago. How can you marry someone else?" I've never taken a liking to Arya's hypocritical ways. No matter why she called Ethan away today, I won't allow him to marry a woman like her into this family. In my previous life, on the day of the wedding, Arya tried to end her life by jumping into the sea when she found out we were getting married. She only left behind a suicide note and a video. "Ethan, I have no choice but to call you brother-in-law, but I love you, I really can't bring myself to say it. I truly envy my sister, she was able to win you over so effortlessly, while my luck always seems to fall just short. If there really is a next life, Ethan, can I marry you instead?" Because Ethan's mother couldn't stand her behavior and thought she was bluffing, she stopped Ethan from continuing the wedding. No one expected that Arya would actually jump into the sea and commit suicide. After the wedding, her body was recovered, already cold. This time, Ethan couldn't bear to watch her die with his own eyes. After receiving the video sent by Arya, his eyes turned red, and he rushed out without hesitation. If it were my past life, I might have felt wronged and sad. But after living 2 lifetimes, I am not only calm, but I even let out a long sigh of relief. This time, I also want to choose the person I want to marry. Morrison, if you want to marry me too, then step forward. This wedding today is just for the two of us. Morrison smiled and tightly held my hand. Okay. The entire hall erupted in an uproar. Ethan's friends exchanged glances below, hurriedly sending him messages. Bro, this time you've really gone too far. Your wife is going to marry someone else. Wasn't it said that Lana was clinging desperately to Ethan, loving him to death and insisting on marrying him? So why did the groom suddenly change? Besides, of all people, she had to choose that cold-faced Dr. Morrison. Could it be that she's angry because Ethan ran out on the wedding, and she's intentionally picking a random man for revenge? Watching as Morrison and I, fingers interlocked, walk toward the wedding altar. Whispers and murmurs rise from below. Morrison's hand trembles slightly, and he lowers his head a little. I understand why they're talking. Morrison's reputation has always been rather poor. They say he's cold-blooded and heartless, showing no warmth toward his patients. There are even rumors that he made a mistake on the operating table that led to a patient's death, and after being fired by the hospital, he was later rehired. His reputation in the circle has long been bad. Many girls are unwilling to marry him. There were even rumors that he had his medical license revoked due to medical malpractice. But I knew this wasn't the real him. Lana, are you just acting on impulse? Morrison suddenly lowered his voice and asked me, if you want to save face, I can help you. But don't let anger ruin your lifelong happiness. I gave him a sympathetic look and was about to comfort him when someone suddenly rushed in frantically, kicking open the hotel door. Lana, don't be reckless. You can't just swap out the groom for something as important as a wedding. Hurry up and get over here. Father rushed over as soon as he heard the news. Seeing Father, the guests stood up one after another to greet him, some even trying to curry favor. But he was furious, glaring at me sternly. What are you still standing there for? Didn't you hear what I said? Morrison frowned slightly and urged me softly. Go over there, don't embarrass your father. I remained standing still without moving. Ever since I was a child, I feared the look on my father's face. Whenever he wore that expression, I would instinctively become well-behaved. When he asked me to give my favorite toy to Arya, I would obediently comply. When he told me to give up the room with the best sunlight to Arya, I would pack my things and move out without a fuss. Even when he wanted me to marry Ethan, I would try on wedding gowns without the slightest resistance. I even learned various etiquettes to prepare myself to become a suitable Mrs. Ethan. But now, I want to be rebellious too. Dad, I want to marry Morrison. I heard myself say calmly. I always listen to you, but this time I will choose my lifelong partner myself. Slap, a heavy hand struck my face, the sound echoing through the entire wedding venue. Everyone fell silent. You unfilial daughter. If you dare marry Morrison today, I will disown you. I calmly looked up at him and suddenly smiled. All right, then let's sever our father-daughter relationship. No one expected it. The famously obedient daughter of the Beaumont family would actually say such a thing. Father was so angry that his face turned pale and his chest heaved violently. Lana, for this doctor's sake, you want to sever ties with your father in front of so many people? It seems I've been too indulgent with you all along, letting you grow so reckless. Since mother passed away, father married Vivian, and they had their precious daughter Arya. Hitting me had become a daily occurrence. He angrily raised his hand. Another slap was about to land on my face, but before it could make contact, it was caught by a hand with distinct, bony fingers. Morrison coldly, without saying a word, shielded me behind him. Dare to lay a hand on her one more time, and see what happens. He ground out the words through clenched teeth. My eyes grew red. Since I was little, no one had ever protected me like this. No one understood why I would marry Morrison, that cold-faced doctor. Only I knew. In my previous life, the day I went into difficult labor happened to be the anniversary of Arya's death. Both my husband and my father only cared about going to the cemetery to accompany the person they cared about most in their hearts. No one cared whether I lived or died. Even the doctor had issued a critical condition notice. After making over a dozen calls to them, all I got in return were impatient refusals. Only Morrison rushed over frantically, mobilized medical resources from another hospital, and forcefully pulled me back from the brink of death. Later, Ethan offended a business rival. The other party set fire, intending to burn down Ethan's villa. I woke up with my 2 children in thick smoke, my leg pinned under a burning cabinet. Holding the crying children, I begged Ethan to save us. He ignored us and rushed into the study to rescue a memorial photo of Arya instead. It was Morrison who charged into the sea of flames without hesitation, carrying me and the children out one by one. As the roof beam collapsed, I shouted at him, "Morrison, get out now." But it was already too late. He was engulfed in the sea of flames, and the last look he gave me was a reassuring smile. Since then, I've had my own white moonlight, the one who gave his life for me. It's a pity that only after his death did I realize how deeply he had hidden his love for me. So this time, I too will protect him and steadfastly choose him, and only him. Father was so angry he saw stars. Ethan, I'm asking you one last time, are you sure you've chosen this man? Yes. I nodded. Father let out a cold laugh. Fine, 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 you've got guts. I hope you won't regret this later. My father said this and left. Many of the guests who had been trying to curry favor with him followed suit. Ethan's mother mocked sarcastically. Lana, your marriage is destined to receive no blessings. If you come to your senses and still intend to marry my Ethan, I will still accept you as my daughter-in-law. I didn't pay attention to anyone, just held Morrison's hand and walked up the steps, one by one. Tell the host, the wedding can begin. Most of the guests close to our 2 families have left the scene. Only a few friends remained, but I still smiled with relief and completed the final part of the wedding with Morrison. From now on, I am your wife. Morrison, in sickness and in health, in riches and in poverty, we are one. Morrison laughed and embraced me, gazing deeply with utmost affection as he said one word. Okay. After the wedding, Morrison took me to live in a riverside apartment he owned. To get our marriage certificate, I still had to go home to fetch my ID card. Just as I arrived home, a red sports car suddenly came speeding straight toward me. Before I could even dodge, Ethan grabbed my arm and roughly shoved me aside. Are you blind? Ethan stared coldly at me, a mocking smile curling at the corner of his lips. I thought you already cut ties with Beaumont. Why are you still here? I spoke indifferently, I came to get my ID to register for the marriage certificate. Ethan's expression immediately stiffened as he stared at me in disbelief. What did you say? Are the rumors outside true? You're really going to marry that murderous doctor? Before I could respond, Arya, dressed in a red dress, walked quickly toward me from the sports car. Oh, I'm so sorry, sister. I didn't see you here just now, I almost bumped into you. It's all my fault. Dad just bought me a new sports car, I was so excited I couldn't control myself. You don't mind, do you? Arya's tone was full of showing off. I glanced at that red Porsche and smiled, lowering my head. Not at all. Over these years, living in Beaumont felt like taking shelter under someone else's roof. I had long grown accustomed to the days when my father and stepmother doted solely on Arya. Back when I wanted to intern at the hospital and asked for just a simple everyday car, my father refused to give me one. Yet whenever Arya so much as asked, luxury sports cars were delivered one after another without him even blinking. Back then, I came to clearly understand one saying, when there's a stepmother, even your own father becomes a stepfather. I just came back to get some things. With that, I turned and left. I never expected that after just a few steps, a bucket of cold water would be poured over my head from above. Ethan burst into laughter. Arya also covered her mouth and snickered but pretended to look innocent. Sister, everyone says you're going to marry that murderous Dr. Morrison. His hands are stained with blood, and he probably carries viruses all over him. Please don't bring anything into our house, I'm just disinfecting you. Seeing through the provocation in her eyes, I stared coldly at Arya. Unfazed, she instead took step after step toward me. Sister, to be honest, I really don't understand what you were thinking. Ethan chose me, even though he ran from the wedding. You shouldn't have just picked any man to save face, right? Everyone knows someone like Morrison has caused a patient's death before, don't they? You marry him, share a bed with him. When you think about the innocent blood on his hands, doesn't it disgust you? I couldn't help but sneer. Better keep an eye on your own man. Morrison gave up his own reputation to protect the patient, leaving no one in the hospital willing to approach him. His reputation may be tarnished, but he has never harmed anyone. That surgery was a deliberate setup by Arya's ex-boyfriend, meant to retaliate against Morrison for refusing to provide false testimony for him. But Ethan was not like that at all. In our past life, we were married on the surface and lived together for 60 years. However, after giving birth to a pair of children, we began living apart. He could never forget Arya, that cherished memory. Every few days, he brings home a young girl who resembles her in appearance to spend the night. He even deliberately acts intimate in front of me. In my eyes, there is no one dirtier than Ethan. I suddenly felt a mischievous urge and deliberately lowered my voice, leaning closer to Arya. Little sister, the man by your side is nothing but what I've discarded. If you don't believe me, he has a black birthmark on the inside of his thigh. I've seen it countless times. You're holding on to a candle I used as if it were a treasure, how revolting. With that said, I left coldly. However, Arya's face suddenly paled. Stomping her feet in anger, she began arguing with Ethan. Ethan, are you lying to me? How does she know about the birthmark on your thigh? Have you been secretly sleeping with her all along? Ethan's face turned dark as he flusteredly tried to explain. No, that's... I know you probably won't believe this, but... Arya, trust me, I've definitely never touched her. Seeing them arguing more and more fiercely, almost coming to blows, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Who told you to slander Morrison? Serves you right. Luckily, father wasn't home. As soon as I got my ID card, I slipped out. Before leaving, I also grabbed a basin of cold water and splashed it at Arya. Seeing her also drenched, I smiled slightly. Good sister, this way I can forgive you. Stop right there. Ethan chased after me, his face livid. He actually left Arya behind for the first time, choosing instead to chase after me. Ethan, are you sure about this? Don't think playing these games of hard to get will make me change my mind. I have decided, in this lifetime, the only person I will marry is Arya, and no one can take her place. I gave a faint smile, turned around, and offered my blessings. Then I wish you a happy marriage and a lifetime of happiness together. Hurry back to your girlfriend, don't follow me anymore. Ethan's expression was grim as he continued to stare at me. Lana, I told you not to play any tricks. Arya is pure and kind-hearted, not as scheming as you. I'm warning you, don't hurt her. In our previous life, even though we were married for decades, you should know I never loved you, so I advise you. Understood, I waved my hand impatiently. If you're not comfortable, Morrison and I will leave this city in the future and never see you again. Silence filled the space behind me, but I couldn't be bothered to continue arguing with him. My mind was flooded with images of going to get the marriage certificate with Morrison, and at the thought, my steps couldn't help but lighten. Just as I stepped out of Beaumont, two honks sounded from behind me. The car window rolled down, and sure enough, it was Morrison who came to pick me up. Honey, get in. I smiled as I got into the passenger seat. What are you doing here? I thought you still had one last patient to check on. Morrison had applied for a 2-month leave from the hospital to go on our honeymoon with me. Of course, we should hurry to the Civil Affairs Bureau. I'm afraid that in a few more days, my wife will be taken away by someone else. He cast a lazy glance out the window. I also turned to look. Ethan was standing there with a livid expression, clenching his fists and staring coldly at us. I deliberately leaned forward in front of him and kissed Morrison on the lips. "Honey, let's go." Morrison's face instantly flushed red, and he nodded with a smile. In his nervousness, he even forgot to release the handbrake when stepping on the gas pedal. Ethan's figure was quickly left behind. Sitting in the car, I idly scrolled through my phone when suddenly a news notification popped up. The chairman of the Beaumont Group severed ties with his eldest daughter Ethan, declaring that he would no longer acknowledge her as his daughter. I just glanced at it, then set it down with a calm and detached expression. "Morrison, I'm no longer the Beaumont heiress now. Do you still want me? Would you think I'm not good enough for you?" He was momentarily stunned, then quickly smiled and tousled my hair. "How could I? He said we could live a different kind of life. Even if we became doctors or nurses, or wandered as drifters, it would be fine. He wouldn't let me endure a hard life." I gazed calmly at Morrison's face, my heart filled with waves of warmth. To protect his patients, he allowed his own reputation to be tarnished, with rumors even spreading that he had caused a patient's death. But I knew. He devoted his entire life to saving lives and helping the injured, never harming anyone. Every time, it was him who saved me. I always thought those were just strokes of luck. Until after Morrison passed away, his mother tearfully told me. "Lana, my son has liked you since childhood. All these years he decided to remain unmarried for you. Have you ever thought about it? How can there be so many coincidental strokes of luck in the world? What seems effortless is often the result of someone silently carrying the weight behind the scenes. Morrison, I promise to love you well this lifetime." I made this vow silently in my heart. Life after marriage was peaceful and happy. Every time Morrison came back from work, he would bring me the green rice cakes I loved to eat. He always worries that I might get bored at home, so he takes me on road trips to nearby cities every now and then. But not until half a month later, after taking a shower, I was lying at home ready to sleep. However, it was already almost 11 p.m., and Morrison still hadn't returned. Suddenly, I came across a short video on my phone. Suspected affair by a cold-blooded doctor, having an intimate relationship with a female nurse in the hospital office. Police have initiated an investigation. Suddenly uneasy, I clicked on the comments below. Indeed, some people's true nature is hard to change. Didn't he just marry the Beaumont heiress? The wedding was all over the headlines, and he can't resist cheating so soon. Truly, worthless mud can't hold up the wall. Even after marrying a fairy, the heart still strays toward other women. One ID looked very familiar. The one with the nickname Ethan specifically tagged me in the comments under the video. "Just look at the man you chose. Now you don't even have a place to cry." I hesitated for a moment, quickly changed my clothes, and took a taxi to the hospital. "Everyone says my husband is having an affair." A crowd had already gathered at the hospital entrance, and there were even police present. The scene was extremely chaotic. I desperately pushed through the crowd, finally bursting into Morrison's office. I found him standing there, looking disheveled. On the sofa lay a woman in a nurse's uniform. What surprised me even more was that Ethan was also present. "What are you doing here?" "Just passing by." Ethan stood with his arms crossed, looking on with amusement, regretting not marrying me now, aren't you? "Lana, you really have bad taste. It's only been a few days since you got married, and he already dares to cheat behind your back. In the future, I'm afraid you'll be wearing a head full of green hats." I'm really curious now, what does the woman who Morrison sneaks around with at midnight even look like? His gaze fixed meaningfully on the figure curled up on the sofa. Every now and then, the girl's sobs could be heard. "You don't have to think to know there's a woman inside." My face slightly paled. Ignoring him, I just stepped forward and grabbed Morrison's hand. "Tell me, what exactly is going on here?" Morrison held my hand. "Lana, do you trust me?" I nodded without hesitation. Morrison seemed to let out a sigh of relief. The next second, he pulled up the woman on the couch. Seeing this scene before me, I couldn't help but widen my eyes in shock. That woman wearing the nurse's uniform turned out to be Arya. Ethan, who had been enjoying the show from the sidelines, instantly changed his expression. Arya, how could it be you? Ethan nearly smashed his fist into Morrison's face. You beast, not satisfied with stealing my fiancée, how dare you lay a hand on Arya too? Just try to lay a single finger on her. Ethan's punch hadn't even landed before Morrison grabbed hold of his fist. Morrison spoke coldly. Calm down, don't forget this is a hospital. You're no match for me with your skills. Ethan's face turned even darker. What the hell is going on? He spat through gritted teeth. He looked at Arya with a pained expression. Arya clearly said she was going to see a friend. Why would she be in your office? Did you force her? Hearing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Ethan really has no brains, stupid and blind. What are you laughing at? He glared at me, baffled. Your husband is cheating on you, and you can still laugh. Not everyone is as foolish as you, I shot back. The moment I saw that woman was Arya, I immediately understood what was going on. Ethan, however, lost control of his emotions. He struggled to hold Arya, his face filled with anger and rage. Morrison, you are simply a beast. Not only did he lure Arya into the office, but he also engaged in this kind of role play, making her wear a nurse uniform. As he spoke, he quickly turned to the police for help. Comrade officers, this doctor is behaving improperly. He must have seduced my girlfriend, please arrest him right away. The police glanced at him and said expressionlessly. Are you mistaken? It was this Morrison who called the police. Arya burst into tears, weeping like a shower of pear blossoms, and threw herself into Ethan's arms. Ethan, they've all been bullying me. You have to stand up for me. It's this Morrison, he lured me here because he was tempted by my looks. Don't believe their words. The police were also puzzled. What on earth is going on? Morrison took out his phone and projected the video onto the large screen in the office for everyone to see. He had recorded the entire process. It was Arya, wearing a nurse's uniform, who actively knocked on his office door and proactively seduced him. She even said that she wanted to taste everything that belonged to her sister. This scene was witnessed by everyone watching. Arya's face turned red and pale alternately, her eyes darting around as she continued to make excuses. That's not what happened, it's not like that at all. This video was fabricated by him. Ethan felt heartbroken the moment he saw her crying. Reason completely lost, he held her in his arms and shouted at the police. Arya is the most innocent and kind-hearted girl, she would never do such a thing. You must have made a mistake. I sneered and spoke. Whether the video is forged or not, there are definitely surveillance cameras in the hospital hallway. Just check the footage to find out. As soon as the words were spoken, Arya's expression froze on her face. The police quickly summoned the hospital security to review the corridor surveillance footage. Sure enough, they saw that Arya had arrived first, purposefully changed into a nurse's uniform, and sneaked into Morrison's office. It wasn't an abduction or coercion at all. Ethan's face gradually turned pale. Morrison smiled at him and shook his phone with the video. Bro, I never expected you to be into this kind of woman. In that case, do you want me to send you this video? You can enjoy it on your own later. Ethan felt utterly humiliated, leaving even Arya behind as he stormed out of the hospital in anger. Arya chased after him, crying out, Ethan, please believe me, they forced me to do this. But she was still taken away by the police. Morrison had immediately reported her intrusion to the police, citing sexual harassment. Even if the perpetrator was a girl, it was unacceptable. On the way back, I teased Morrison. Even when a girl comes to you on her own, you still refuse. Is it because Arya isn't pretty enough? No, Morrison said, his tone unusually serious. What? I was completely confused. Morrison stopped the car and hugged me. Because in this world, apart from you, my heart won't be moved by anyone else. Lana, I love you. I suddenly smiled. In my memory, Morrison has always been the kind of man who is taciturn and not good at expressing himself. He never had much presence, from childhood to adulthood. In college, he would quietly save me a seat and silently bring me breakfast. Yet he never left his name, not even letting me know it was him. So I naturally assumed that it was Ethan who was sending me breakfast. In those repeated mistaken chance encounters, I secretly gave my heart away. Until I ended up ruining my entire life over it. But this time everything has finally been set right. Ethan had never felt so miserable as he did today. He had thought that by successfully escaping the marriage and defying his parents' orders to bring Arya home, he would not have to face such an unexpected and disappointing act from her. Ethan drank bottle after bottle of alcohol until he was completely drunk. He watched that video over and over again. How Arya flirted in her nurse's uniform. How she knocked on the man's office door. Even brazenly seducing him. Ethan's eyes were bloodshot, and he was almost losing his mind. This was a side of her he had never seen before. In his eyes, Arya was an innocent and kind-hearted little rabbit, someone who wouldn't even have the heart to crush an ant. She wouldn't even dare to eat chicken. Because she had once watched chicks hatching from their eggs on television, she felt that eating meat was a cruel thing. Every time she got frightened, she would instinctively shrink into his arms. So delicate, adorable, and arousing a strong desire to protect her. How could it possibly be that kind of girl? Noise came from the next table, seemingly discussing someone. Are you talking about that Arya? What Beaumont's second daughter, bullshit. She's clearly a green tea bitch. You haven't seen how she flirts with men in that nurse uniform, she's even more shameless than those nightclub girls. If you're interested and want to have a little fun, that's one thing, but don't even think about taking her home as a girlfriend. She's not worth it. Haven't you heard? She's been with 6 or 7 boyfriends, had multiple abortions, and probably can't even have kids anymore. Ethan clenched his fists tightly and slammed them on the table. Who the hell are you talking about? Shut up. Those men with colorful hair heard the noise and turned around with cold, mocking smiles. Hey, what's the matter, is Arya your girlfriend? Listen, bro, a word of advice, don't fall for a woman like her. Otherwise, you'll be the only one who gets hurt in the end. Before leaving, they threw down a pile of photos. Ethan flipped through them expressionlessly, his face growing paler as he looked. Those photos were extremely explicit. Each one featured Arya as the main character. Some showed her wearing various bizarre outfits, while others captured exaggerated, bold movements and ambiguous poses with men. Each image pierced his eyes deeply. Ethan finally understood. Arya was always that kind of promiscuous girl. It came as no surprise that the few boyfriends she had dated before had all dumped her. Just because she had too many abortions. Only he, knowing nothing, foolishly treasured her and felt sorry for her. Although Ethan didn't want to admit it, he had to accept the fact. She was not even comparable to a single finger of Lana's. After returning home, Morrison finally finished all his work and could accompany me on our honeymoon. We first went to Bali, then Santorini. We even took a photo together in a church in Venice. Leaving our footprints everywhere, we finally opened up our hearts and walked into each other's inner worlds. In the evening, Morrison let me lean on his shoulder. As we sat on the terrace stargazing, I spoke my mind for the first time. Morrison, I'm actually not the innocent little bunny you thought I was at all. Those times Arya had abortions were related to me. Morrison gave me a surprised look. How were they related to you? I gave a bitter smile. Because I know that Arya will take anything that's mine. Those few boys she dated were actually ones I pretended to like on purpose. Every time Arya saw me with them, she'd get jealous and find a way to take them from me. The tactic she excels at is getting intimate with them. But the guys I approached weren't exactly good people either. So, I figured she'd bring it upon herself, but I never warned her. Am I a bad person? Morrison seemed to understand my self-deprecating tone and gently held me in his arms. I understand, it's not your fault. Living in that environment, you have to protect yourself, use some means, it doesn't necessarily mean you're bad. I didn't want to cry, but hearing him say that, I couldn't help but feel my eyes grow red. You know what? Actually, it was Arya and her mother who killed my mom. This was the first time I opened up and told someone the secret buried deep in my heart. I'm not the nice, obedient girl everyone thinks I am. I've been using all my resources to seek revenge. It was because Arya and her mother caused my mother's death. My mother never would have gotten sick if it weren't for Vivian coming between my parents, scheming to become my father's wife as quickly as possible. She pretended to be my mother's close friend. He gave her a pile of beautiful little stones, claiming they were gems brought back from abroad. He even had them made into exquisite jewelry. In reality, those stones were highly radioactive. My mother wore that necklace for only 2 months before she was diagnosed with leukemia. Later, my mother passed away. Vivian successfully married into our family and gave birth to Arya, taking my father's love along with everything else. Though I still have a father, I live like an orphan. In the most painful year. To teach me a lesson, my stepmother even locked me in the basement and called a strange man to assault me. They pulled my hair, tearing out a large clump. The pain left me numb. It seemed a few of my teeth were knocked out, because I was disobedient, struggling desperately, and they would use violence to make me submit. But I was stubborn. I found a brick from somewhere that day and smashed it straight onto the man's head. He passed out, bleeding heavily. Only after nearly losing a life did my stepmother let me out. She was afraid the matter would escalate, that my father would find out and hold her accountable. So she dealt with it quietly. Since then, she has become increasingly wary of me. At first, Arya still felt some sisterly affection toward me, chasing after me every day, calling me sister and saving delicious candy for me. But her stepmother fanned the flames behind her back, making her slowly hate me. She also said that if it weren't for me, all of Beaumont's property would belong to Arya. Therefore, she regarded me as an enemy and began to contend with me for everything. The evil causes she personally sowed should naturally be tasted by her daughter as the bitter consequences. After the honeymoon, Morrison and I returned to our Riverside apartment and resumed a normal life. He didn't mind that I was idle. In fact, worried I might get bored, he even opened a small clinic for me to manage. The other day, I had just come downstairs. Suddenly, I spotted a suspicious figure by the entrance. I was just about to call for help and alert, when that person suddenly darted out and cornered me against the wall. Lana. It was actually Ethan, utterly drunk. A pair of bloodshot eyes stared at me. Lana, did you know about this all along? Know what? I was puzzled. He looked at me with a pitiful, hurt expression, like a sad little puppy. You knew all along that Arya is the type of woman I despise most, yet you never exposed her in front of me. Did you do it on purpose? Is it because of how I treated you in the previous life, so now in this life you want to witness my downfall with your own eyes? Ethan's voice carried a nasal quality, yet it was domineering and assertive. He stepped forward and grabbed me in a hug. To my surprise, he leaned down, trying to force a kiss. Are you insane? Ethan, I'm not your wife now, look at me and see who I really am. Ethan suddenly let out a self-mocking laugh. Lana, I haven't mistaken you for someone else. Of course, I know it's you. I regret it. In my past life, it was because Arya committed suicide that I held on to a stubborn belief that saving her would give me a different life, but I was terribly wrong. The moment I chose her, I had already lost you. I frowned impatiently. Isn't this just pointless talk? Lana, I've already broken up with Arya. In this lifetime, I could never marry her again. I can now finally see my own heart clearly, the one I truly love has always been you. In our past life, I didn't treat you well enough. This time, let me make it up to you, okay? Lana, please give me another chance. I can't help but see Ethan as both pitiful and ridiculous. When Ethan and I got engaged back then, Arya had to steal him away simply because he was my fiancé. But now I don't want him anymore. And neither does she. Arya was determined to seduce my husband Morrison, but after being thoroughly rebuffed last time, she didn't want to risk ending up at the police station again. So she finally gave up. I thought she was finally going to commit to Ethan. Unexpectedly, Ethan chose to give up on her. I let out a heavy sigh and pushed Ethan away. Please show some self-respect. Whoever you end up with is none of my concern. Remember, I am Morrison's wife now. If you continue to harass me, don't blame me for calling the police. Ethan still wanted to cause trouble, but in the next moment, Morrison took my hand and shielded me behind him. Ethan immediately backed down. He knew that Morrison had been pushing for hospital reforms these past few days. Morrison even acquired his father's private hospital. Even Beaumont Group, the man I call my father, had to fawn over Morrison. The man who used to hit me at the slightest provocation no longer mentioned cutting ties as father and daughter. Instead, he took the opportunity to curry favor with Morrison. Let me whisper in your ear, and for the sake of family, give him a few collaboration opportunities. This means his company is already in decline. It's even reached the brink of crisis, which is why he had to put aside his pride and turn to the daughter he looks down on the most for help. I just sneered. Truly, in the face of interests, emotions are the most fragile. Sure. I took a sip of coffee and said with a smile. As long as you divorce Aria's mother and kowtow 3 times in front of my mother's grave, I will agree. 3 months after returning from the honeymoon, I found out I was pregnant. Morrison was even more excited than I was, holding me in the palm of his hand, afraid that I might suffer any grievance. He even quit his job at the hospital to focus on studying obstetrics and gynecology, just to help me deliver the baby himself. One afternoon, I was reading at home when the doorbell suddenly rang. I opened the door and saw my father standing outside, with a complicated expression on his face. Dad? I looked at him in surprise, not knowing why he had come. Lana, I want to talk with you. My father's voice was a bit choked, which made me even more puzzled. I hesitated for a moment but still let him in. Father sat down on the sofa and remained silent for a long time before speaking. Lana, I've come to apologize to you. Seeing my surprised expression, he gave a bitter smile. All these years, Dad has wronged you, and he has wronged your mother too. I didn't say anything, quietly waiting for him to continue. Yesterday, Vivian was taken away by the police. I looked up sharply, unable to believe my ears. The police uncovered a murder case from years ago, and the evidence points to Vivian. She confessed. She was the one who killed your mother. My heart twisted in pain. Even though I had known the truth for a long time, hearing this news was still shocking. Those so-called gems she gave your mother actually contained radioactive materials. She knew your mother loved jewelry and deliberately set this trap. Father's eyes were filled with regret and tears. Lana, Dad really regrets it. If I had cared more about your mother back then, perhaps she wouldn't have left us. My tears fell silently. How many nights had I dreamed of my mother's gentle smile, only to wake up and find it was just an illusion. I know I haven't been good to you all these years, blinded by Vivian. Father knelt before me, tears streaming down his cheeks. Lana, I was wrong. Can you forgive me? Looking at my father kneeling on the floor, my heart was filled with mixed emotions. Did I hate him? Of course I did. I hated his favoritism, his neglect, and how he allowed my stepmother and Arya to bully me. But he is, after all, my father, the only family I have left in this world. Dad, get up, I said softly. What's done is done, we can't go back. Father looked up at me, hope filling his eyes. Now you know the truth, and I don't hold any grudge against you. But some wounds can never be erased. I touched my slightly rounded belly. I have my own family now, and soon I'll have my own child. I hope you can respect my choice and stop interfering in my life. Father nodded, wiped away his tears, and stood up. Lana, you're right. Dad will respect your decision. He took a document out of his pocket. This is the will I've written. All the shares of the Beaumont Group will go to you. This is what you deserve, and it's also a small compensation for all the grievances you've endured over the years. I didn't take the document, just shook my head. Dad, I don't need these things. Morrison has given me enough love and security, we're living just fine. Father gave a bitter smile. I know you don't lack these things now, but after all, they are your rights. I'll keep the documents, and whenever you want them, you can come get them anytime. He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. I almost forgot to tell you. Arya is not my biological daughter, she was born from Vivian and her lover. All these years, I've been kept in the dark. How laughable. I looked at him in surprise. I hadn't expected this. No wonder Arya doesn't resemble father at all. Dad, what about Arya? She left with her biological father. I heard they moved abroad. That kid Ethan still doesn't know about it, poor thing. With that, father slowly walked away. His retreating figure looked much older than I remembered. I closed the door and slowly slid down to sit on the floor, leaning against it. Years of grudges and pain seemed to be settled at this moment. My mother's spirit in heaven should be able to rest in peace now. Days passed, and my belly grew bigger and bigger. Morrison was even more nervous than I was, studying nutrition recipes every day, worried that our baby and I might be lacking in anything. That day, I was reading on the couch when the doorbell suddenly rang. Morrison went to open the door, and I heard a familiar voice. I want to see Lana, I have something to say to her. It's Ethan. Morrison furrowed his brows as he walked back. Ethan wants to see you. Should I kick him out? I shook my head. Let him in. Let's hear what he has to say. Ethan walked in, looking even more haggard than the last time we met. His gaze fell on my swollen belly, and his expression grew complicated. Lana, I came to say goodbye. I looked at him with confusion. I'm going abroad, and I might not be back for a long time, he said with a bitter smile. Arya ran off, taking most of my assets. My family is now bankrupt, and I'm too ashamed to stay here any longer. I never expected things to turn out this way. In my previous life, Ethan treated me like a replacement, making my life unbearable. In this life, I kept my distance from him, and fate still gave him the punishment he deserved. I see, then I wish you a safe journey. I said calmly. Ethan froze for a moment, seemingly not expecting me to be so indifferent. Lana, there's one more thing I want to tell you. He took a deep breath. In my previous life, I always thought you were the one who caused Arya's death, so I hated you and sought revenge. But this lifetime, I found out that Arya never actually died, she deliberately set up the whole scheme to deceive all of us. And I, in my foolishness, wasted my entire life because of guilt and obsession. I stared at him in shock. What do you mean? Arya is alive? Ethan nodded. She's been living well abroad, with her mother's lover. All these years, she's been deceiving me, deceiving everyone. I didn't know what to say. Fate truly is so ironic. In my previous life, Ethan hated me for a lifetime because of an illusion, but in this life, he finally discovered the truth, only to lose everything. Ethan, let the past stay in the past. We've both moved on with our lives now, I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with regret. If I had chosen you back then, would everything have been different? Morrison walked over and held my hand. But you didn't, and I chose her. This is fate's arrangement. Ethan glanced at our clasped hands and nodded silently. You're right. I wish you happiness. He turned and walked away, his steps unsteady. I know this is the last time we'll see each other. After the door closed, Morrison gently hugged me. Are you okay? I leaned into his embrace and nodded. I'm fine. I just never expected fate to be so wonderfully unpredictable. Morrison kissed my forehead. No matter how fate arranges things, I only know that in this lifetime, since I've found you, I won't let go again. I looked up into his eyes, which were filled with tenderness and determination. Morrison, thank you for always being there. He smiled, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes spreading like unfurling petals. You silly thing, I'm the one who should be thanking you. A few months later, I safely gave birth to our son, naming him Asher, meaning hope, also symbolizing the dawn of our new life. Morrison was even more nervous than I was, treating me like a queen every day. Even if the baby cried just once at night, he would pick him up to soothe him immediately, fearing I would be too tired. Father knocked on the door almost every week, bringing a pile of nourishments, his face wearing a humble smile. He quit drinking and lost a lot of weight, no longer the stern chairman who would slap me in the face whenever the mood struck. He knelt before me and cried several times, begging for forgiveness, begging me to come home, even willing to transfer all the company's shares to me unconditionally. Each time, I let him come in and sit for a while, listen to what he had to say, and then calmly showed him out. Dad, over the years, you've chosen Vivian and Aria. There's been no place for me for a long time now. Now that the truth is out, you're filled with regret, but my scars are still here. I don't need your compensation, nor do I need the Beaumont Group. I have Morrison, I have Asher, and that's enough for me. Every time he leaves, his eyes are red, and his back grows more hunched. Later, I heard that the Beaumont Group completely collapsed under internal and external pressures. He sold off all his assets, racked up a mountain of debt, and in the end moved to a tiny rented house in the suburbs, surviving on a meager pension. Those guests who once fawned over him, not a single one reappeared. Vivian's trial became the top headline in the city. Not only was she sentenced to life imprisonment, but additional charges were also brought against her: intentional homicide, child abuse, illegal trade of radioactive materials. In court, it was publicly revealed how she had step-by-step schemed to kill my mother, how she had ordered people to assault a young me, and how she had incited Aria to take everything from me. The media dug up all the filthy deeds she had committed over the years, turning her from the once glorious Mrs. Victor into a widely denounced vicious woman. In prison, it said she was brutally bullied by fellow inmates, losing clumps of hair and nearly having a mental breakdown. Aria's fate was even worse. She had intended to run off with the stolen money and her biological father to start a new life abroad, but just a few days after arriving overseas, she was arrested in a joint operation by Interpol. It turned out that over the years, she had not only engaged in multiple instances of fraud and abortions but was also implicated in several extortion cases. Her biological father pushed all the dirty deeds onto her, resulting in him receiving only a few years' sentence while she was extradited back to the country. Additional charges of theft, fraud, false accusation, and sexual harassment were added, leading to a 25-year sentence. On the day of the trial, she wore a prison uniform and completely broke down as she was escorted into the courtroom. Once the carefully groomed jewel in the palm, her hair was now a mess, and her face was covered in scratches. She saw me in the gallery and screamed hysterically through the glass, "Sister, you did this to me. You bitch." I just looked at her calmly, holding the sleeping Asher in my arms. But she lunged at the glass like a madwoman and was immediately subdued by the bailiff. The media captured her in a pitiful state, with a merciless headline: "Once a socialite, now a prisoner, the green TB ****H finally gets her comeuppance." Ethan, his ending gave me the most satisfaction. He originally planned to go to Africa as a volunteer doctor to start a new life. But it turned out that a large portion of the money Aria embezzled was actually funds he had illicitly extracted from business partners through improper means. The police followed the trail and dragged him into it, embezzling public funds, commercial fraud, and harboring criminals. On the day of his arrest, it was said to be at the airport, where he was surrounded by reporters like a rat crossing the street. In court, he lowered his head, not daring to utter a word. Ethan's family went completely bankrupt. Ethan's mother was so enraged that she suffered a stroke and became paralyzed. He couldn't even afford the medical expenses, and in the end, he could only watch helplessly as his mother passed away in a cheap hospital. Sentenced to 15 years, when he was released from prison, he was already in his 50s, his hair completely white, no longer the spirited young master he once was. During one prison visit, he pleaded with me through the glass, "Lana, no, Lana, I know I was wrong. In our past life, I failed you, and in this life, I've failed you again. Could you help me, for the sake of the marriage we once had? Holding my child, I smiled faintly. Ethan, we were husband and wife in our past life, but you chose to spend a lifetime by Arya's grave. In this life, you still chose her. Now, you two can finally grow old together, in prison. He was in tears, pounding on the glass and shouting in regret, but I had already turned and walked away, never looking back. Meanwhile, life for Morrison and me just kept getting better and better. He took on reform projects at several top hospitals and opened his own private clinic, transforming his reputation from cold-blooded doctor to medical legend. We moved into a seaside mansion, Asher chasing after a little dog in the garden, while I leaned against Morrison's chest and watched the sunset. That night, moonlight poured into the bedroom, and Morrison held me close, asking softly, "Lana, if you were given another chance to start over, would you still choose me?" I smiled and tightened my fingers around his. "Morrison, not just once. Even if I were given 1,000, 10,000 chances, I would always choose you. Because in this lifetime I not only found true love, but I also watched those who hurt me, one by one, pay the price." He kissed my forehead, his voice so tender it felt like dripping water. "That's good. Because the luckiest thing in my life is that you finally saw my love, and let me personally help you collect all the debts." Outside the window, the night breeze gently brushed by, and the stars shone brightly like diamonds. All the grievances, forbearance, and tears from my past life have now turned into the most exhilarating revenge in this one. And I have finally become the person I most wanted to be, deeply loved and completely free.